Welcome to my video on the best Terastal for every Dark type Pokemon, where we're going to look at the pure Dark type and all of the Dark type combinations and assign them the best Terastal typing. Now I've gone through multiple different Terastals and explained exactly why I've assigned them for each of the individual typings. If you're looking for a specific type, please do go down below, click on the description and you'll find there are timestamps for all of the individual different types. Now, I really would appreciate if you could interact with this video, because honestly this has been my baby for the last couple of months and it's taken a lot essentially for this, and I would really appreciate any interaction. I hope you guys can see how much effort this has taken to do this. I've done this for every single type. There's 171 different types, so it has been a really big project, but I'd really appreciate that if you could interact in some way. But yeah, without further ado, let's get started. Just some clarification about this video. First of all, this is not an exhaustive list of every single Terastal that would work well with that typing. It's just ones that, in my opinion, would work best for those specific typings. Also, this does not factor in abilities, so in the trailer we saw that Colossal turned to a water-type Terastal and had its steam engine activated. Now, in some cases, there are going to be abilities that are going to allow for this to be able to take place effectively, and it's going to allow for abilities to be used with regards to the Terastal combination. And when I've talked about their typings here, I have not considered abilities. I will talk about that separately when I do the competitive guide videos in the future. Also, some Pokemon may be suitable to use specific Terastal based on powerful moves that they have. So for example, if a Pokemon has a ground type move such as Earthquake, which is more powerful than Tera Blast, then they could definitely turn to that Terastal to get that stab, to be able to allow that to do more damage. So in some cases where Pokemon have got powerful moves or a wide move pool, they may be suitable to use more variety of Terastal, but again, I have not factored that in with this one, just on the specific typings as a generalization. With the pure Dark type, we have a couple of different weaknesses. So you have Bug type weakness, you have a Fairy type weakness, and you have a Fighting type weakness. Now, with these, you have got Poison and Steel, which work well against Fairy types. Fairy typing obviously being a very common typing in the Pokemon world and is used in a lot of competitive teams. You've then got the Fairy typing to cover the Fighting type. You could also run potentially Psychic to cover the Fighting type as well, and I put Flying in there because it covers both the Fighting type and also the Bug type weakness as well. So in this case, I would say Flying probably is actually slightly better than some of the other ones, but at the same time, I think Fairy is more likely than your Bug type, and probably as likely as your Fighting type as well. Now, notable Pokemon, there are many more, but I've put Absol. Umbreon is a really good Pokemon. In fact, a Poison type Umbreon would actually be really cool, I think, in my opinion. Zoroark and also Liepard as well. They all have pretty good usage in competitive, and if they can change their typing, that's definitely going to be fantastic. Now, normal Dark Pokemon, we have the Flying type being the most usable here, along with the Fairy and the Psychic type. The big typing you're expecting to come in against these is the Fighting type. So Fighting type Pokemon are going to be a massive problem for this. If you can turn to a Flying, Fairy or Psychic, you have the super effective aspect when it comes to Tera Blast or any other attack that you might have that might be able to be boosted. You've also got the Ghost type as well. Obviously that's immune to the Fighting type, so that gives you the defensive aspect. You could potentially even go for a Poison type here that resists the Fighting type and also would be super effective against Fairy types that might come in, but I definitely focus more on the Fighting type aspect here because Fighting type very common moves and could definitely be problematic for you. The notable Pokemon, you've got Obstagoon and you've also got Alolan Raticate. Those are the only two Dark normal Pokemon that currently exist as a final evolution line, but definitely they could take advantage of any of those Terastals. But as I said, this isn't an exhaustive list. Next up, we have the Bug and Dark type. Now, currently, at time of recording, there are no Bug Dark type Pokemon revealed, but in the long term, there will eventually be a Bug Dark type. So there are 3 different Terastals that I would recommend here. Obviously, you have got the Rock and the Fire type weakness in terms of the Bug, so I think Water type would definitely work really well here. You've also got the aspect of Flying and Fire, so you could do a Rock Terastal if you wanted to, but I thought Water might work slightly better. You've then got Poison and Steel on here as well, so in terms of weakness on the Dark side, you do have the Fairy type. So the Fairy type will be super effective against you. Poison and Steel will both resist that Fairy type and be super effective against it, as well as Poison being able to resist a couple of other types, and Steel resisting things like Rock type, which could come in as Next up, we have the Dark Dragon typing. So this typing, we have got two main weaknesses. You've got kind of three weaknesses, but you've got your Fighting type and your Fairy type are the big ones. You've also got Dragon type, and then you've got Bug type as well as a weakness, and also Ice type. So in terms of dealing with these weaknesses, I think Fairy type is your most common. That's your 4 times effective. So Poison and Steel type are definitely fantastic typings to go for. Steel type also covers the Ice type weakness as well, so that could be slightly better than Poison type. You then got the Flying type to be able to cover the Bug and also the Fighting type weakness as well, which would work really, really well in your favour. So all three of these are actually, I would say, equally as usable because they can have coverage for a lot of weaknesses that you do have in terms of getting rid of the weakness, being resistant to the weakness, and also being super effective against the other Pokemon. And the most noticeable Pokemon here is Hydreigon. I would love to see another Pokemon, but Hydreigon, obviously, absolutely huge Pokemon, really fantastic. Next up, we've got the Dark and Electric type. Now, the only noticeable Pokemon we have here is Morpeko. Now, I thought Morpeko wasn't the only one. I personally thought there were more, but that is the only one that is the case here. Now, suggested Terastal, you have got two main weaknesses here. You have got the Ground type, you have got the Fighter type, you've also got the Fairy type as well. So what I would definitely recommend is a Grass or Water type for that Ground type, and Ground type is very, very common. So Grass and Water cover that really well. Flying type covers both the Bug and the Fighting weakness, and you may want to put something like Poison in there, or Steel to allow to cover for Fairy typing. Bear in mind that people are likely to bring in a Ground type Pokemon against this, which both Poison and Steel are not very good against. So do be cautious with that, and bear in mind that all three of these Terastals have neutral damage from Fairy type, so it wouldn't be the end of the world if a Fairy type Pokemon came in. But I think with Steel and Poison, there is that big risk of them still bringing in a Ground type and hitting you really hard with that attack. Next up, we have the Dark and Fairy type, with the only Pokemon currently released is Grimmsnarl that has this typing. Now, in terms of what damage you are going to take from this, you have got the Poison and the Steel type from the Fairy typing, and you've also got the Fairy typing super effective on the Dark typing. So the 3 Terastals that you are going to need. So for the Fairy typing, you've got the Poison and the Steel. So any fairies that come in, Poison and Steel damage is going to hit really hard for super effective damage, and also resist both Fairy. And if you're going for a Poison or Steel type Pokemon to take this thing out, then you have the Ground type, which is super effective against both of those. And I believe Ground types resist the Steel type. I don't think they resist the Poison type. I'm not 100% sure on that. I always forget those kind of combinations. But regardless, your Ground typing is going to be the most effective thing against the Steel and Poison type, so you can choose any of those 3 and they will all work really well. Next up, we have the Dark and Fighting types. The 2 notable Pokemon that we've got here are Scrafty and Pangoro. They are both fantastic Pokemon that you can use, but the biggest issue with this typing is the 4 times weakness to Fairy typing, and also the weakness to Flying types. Fighting types, sorry, and Flying types. So for this, you have Terastal, you have the Fairy type, which is the big one, so Poison or Steel is going to be your main Terastal typing here. Just bear in mind that obviously Fighting types can come in, so Steel isn't as good. I would recommend Poison over Steel in this case. You've got Flying to cover the Fighting type Terastals, Fighting type Pokemon that could come in, and you've also then got the opportunity to use Electric types when it could come to the Flying types as well, because we have got a Flying type weakness, but that would also cover Rock and Ice there. But I think definitely your Poison is going to be your top Terastal here, followed by Flying or Steel. Next up, we have the Dark and Fire type Pokemon. Now, there are 2 main Pokemon here that are representative in Houndoom and Incineroar. Incineroar being used in lots and lots of teams, especially in VGC. Now, I have got 3 specific Terastal typings that you can use in this case for these Pokemon. Now, when it comes to your Dark typing, you are not going to be hit super effectively by Bug or Fairy typing. You're only going to be hit super effectively by Fighting type. So I've put Psychic in here, not Psychic, I put Fairy in here, but you can use Psychic as well to cover that Fighting type weakness, possibly even Fairy type as well if you wanted to put that in. Now, for the Fire type, you have got a massive weakness to Ground and Rock. and also water. Now grass covers all three of those weaknesses, and water is resistant to the water type and also super effective against the ground and rock types, so those would both work really well. It depends on how your team is built on which one you want to focus on here, but all three of these Terastals are really good options. Next up we have the Dark Flying type. Now notable Pokemon, there are several here. You've got Galarian Moltres, which is a fantastic mon, Honchkrow, which is probably the weakest of the three, but then you've got Mandibuzz, which is absolutely insane. I love using Mandibuzz personally. Now there are 3 Terastal typings I've put here, but there are other opportunities that you can use as well. In terms of your weaknesses, what you have got the Fairy type weakness, but you have not got the Bug or the Fighting type weakness anymore, but you have picked up a weakness to Electric, Ice, and Rock. Now I'd recommend, because Fairy typing is very common, that you go for a Poison or a Steel type. Obviously lots of Pokemon cover with Fairy type moves. Every team I think I've seen has a Fairy type Pokemon on it, or the vast majority, and that Poison Steel type allows you to cover any of those Fairy types that want to come in. You've also got the Ground type that covers any Electric types that want to come in. You could even have a Fighting type, which gets rid of the Ice and the Rock type weakness as well, so that is a possible 4th Terastal on there as well, but I think your Fairy weakness is going to be the main one there, but you can run Ground or Fighting if you're worried more with regards to the weaknesses involved around the Flying type. Next up we have the Dark Ghost type, the once typing that didn't have any weaknesses. Now obviously when Fairies were introduced, they were super effective against Dark and neutral against Ghost, meaning that these Pokemon then got nerfed slightly. So the Pokemon we have are Sableye and also Spiritomb here. Now as they're only weak to Fairy, there are only really 2 suggested Terastal I would go for here. I was just going for Poison or Steel typing because they're super effective against the Fairy typing, and that's basically the only thing that you need to worry about with regards to this one. Here we have the Grass and Dark type Pokemon. Now there's 2 notable Pokemon here. There is Zarude and there is Shiftry. Now Zarude obviously is a much more powerful Pokemon, but Shiftry does have its random niches. Now Dark Grass type Pokemon, your big 4 times weakness is to Bug, so that's where the main Terastal focus is here, but also Fairy types are very common, so I've covered that as well. You have also got Fire, so you could definitely run like a Water or a Ground Terastal if you're really concerned about that. Obviously, again, it depends on how you built your team. But the main ones I would suggest, you've got your Fire type and your Flying type, and they cover the 4 times effectiveness of the Bug typing. So they get rid of the Bug types and a variety of other typings that might want to come in as well. So for example, if a Fighting type wants to come in, the Flying type would cover that also. You've then got the Steel type to cover the Fairy types. Realistically, a Fairy type move is going to cause a lot of damage, but if you Terastal to a Steel type, it's going to do next to no damage, and you are going to have super effective attack against that Pokemon, assuming that you run Terra Blast. Here we have the Dark and Ground type, and the only Pokemon that I can see that was notable here was Crocodile, which is a fantastic Pokemon. Now, there are lots of different weaknesses this thing actually has in terms of Water, Grass, Fighting, Bug, and also Fairy. So there are a few different ways that we can work around this. So I've put Electric here that covers the Water type. You could also put Grass type here if you wanted to cover the Water types. You've then got Flying type, which covers the Grass typing and also the Fighting typing, and the Bug typing, which could be super effective against you. So I'd say Flying in this case is the best. Then I have put the Poison typing to cover the Fairy types. Now I haven't put the Steel typing here because you have got the aspect of bringing in a Fighting type, which could cause a lot of damage to you. So the Poison typing I think would be superior in this case, also super effective against Grass types, so it has that double up effect as well. So I think definitely Flying and Poison are probably your better options here, but you have got Electric, you have got even Grass as an option there. Next up we have the Dark and Ice type. Now the big thing here is you have a 4 times weakness to Fighting type Pokemon, so you do obviously need to be very cautious when it comes to those, and I would suggest having a Flying or a Fairy type as an option here to cover against those Fighting type Pokemon. Poison also works well because it covers your Fairy type weakness also and resists the Fighting type, but Flying type, Poison type, or not Poison type, Psychic type or Fairy type will hit that super effective Fighting type Pokemon that is likely to come out in this case. I've also put Water type Pokemon here because Fire types obviously like to come in, as well as rock types. So water can hit hard there, also so can the ground type as well. So there's 4 different options there: water or ground, and then flying, fairy, possibly even psychic as well. And bear in mind, you're probably not going to get hit by a ghost type attack or a dark type attack, so the psychic could also work quite nicely in this instance. Next up is the dark and poison type. There are 2 Pokemon here that are noticeable: Drapion and also Skuntank, and they only have 1 weakness. They have a weakness to ground type Pokemon. So in this case, water or grass are your best Terastal because they're super effective against ground types. You could run flying to have the immunity if you wanted to, but I think the water or grass are going to be better. The grass probably going to be the best one because it does resist the ground type attacks as well, I think. Not 100% sure now that I've said it, but I think that grass does resist ground type. Here we have the dark psychic type, and this is a very rare typing. The only Pokemon to have this is Malamar, and actually this thing is pretty good typing, other than the fact that it's hit by fairy types by 2 times and 4 times on bug types. Now bug type is a rarer type to run, but if you wanted to run this thing, I would suggest having a Terastal with either fire or flying, which is going to be super effective against the bug type aspect, so it can get rid of any bug types. You've also got rock there as well, which hits the bug type if you wanted to run that as well, but I just thought those work the best there. And then steel type to cover the weakness in terms of the fairy. That would hit you with super effective damage on the fairy type and also be taking less damage with regard to fairy type attacks. Next up we have dark rock, and immediately the first thing that runs out to me here is your 4 times weakness to fighting. So I've put fairy and flying as the Terastal typing here. Flying obviously being super effective against the grass types that could come in, and also the fighting type. Fairy type being super effective against any fighting types. Now you could run a poison type here to resist the the fighting type, and then also be able to hit hard against fairy types, which are super effective against you. And then I've suggested the grass type because you could definitely see a ground type or a water type come in here, and that grass type would then deal with that. So many different options that you've got to run here based on situations you predict yourself to get in. So I'd recommend looking at what your team is looking like and deciding building based on that. Next up is the Dark and Steel type. Now the notable Pokemon for this is going to be Bisharp, but at the same time you have got a huge weakness to fighting type. 4 times weakness to fighting types, meaning that your Terastal realistically you're going to want to run Fire, Flying, Fairy or Psychic type. So running any of those freeze types will get rid of any of that fighting type weakness. You've also got a big weakness to ground as well, so I'd recommend running either a water or a grass type to cover that ground weakness, potentially as a Terastal. I'd say your biggest focus definitely wants to be your flying, fairy or psychic, but to cover the fighting type. But if you want to go for the water or grass, obviously you can go for that as an alternative. Next up we have got the water dark type. Now with this one there is a bit of a difference in the amount of typings that can go up against it. So you've got electric typing and grass typing it being weak to. You've got fairy typing and fighting typing, even bug typing that it can be weak to. So I've suggested as one Terastal you could have a fire type because that will hit the grass and also the bug typing for super effective damage. And you've got ground typing mostly for the electric type Pokemon, and then you could have fairy, flying or psychic to cover that fighting type weakness. And you could possibly even cover with poison as well to cover the fairy type weakness as well. So there are quite a few different Terastal types that you could do there. My main one I'd recommend probably is going to be the fire type because it hits super effective and also resists the most cases. But you could definitely run any of those other ones that I've suggested. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate every single view that any of these videos get, and you know I put so much time into this that if you made it this way, then all I can do is thank you with my heart, because you know you're what helps the channel. So yeah, thank you so much for watching. As I said, if you could interact, I'd really appreciate it. Comment down below if there are any ones that you disagree with or any ones that you would add a different Terastal typing to, and give your reasoning for it as well. And I'd really love to see that. I think that would be a really, really cool way to interact with me, and I will definitely take a look at them and I'll try and reply as much as I can. But yeah, thank you so much for watching.